Hey y'all! So I found a book that I really wanted to read to you guys today. It's full of scary stories, but it's not the book that I showed you in my last video. I'm gonna make a video about that next week, I decided, because I found this one and I really want to read about haunted asylums today. That was like what I was looking for, and I found the perfect book for that. I found this book on Amazon. It's called Real Haunted Hospitals and Mental Asylums. I did all of my rambling in my last video, so I really have nothing to say, so we're gonna hop right into this. They're pretty long sections, so I'm probably just going to read about 2 haunted asylums. But the first one that we're going to learn about today, these are like ghost stories, by the way, so they have a little bit of hauntings in them, but a lot of it is like the background of the place itself, which I thought was really interesting. I'm busy. So the first place that we're going to read about is the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. In the early 1900s America, the country was ravaged by tuberculosis, a deadly and incurable disease. The bacterial infection causes painful growths in the lungs that makes it increasingly difficult to breathe, resulting in a slow and difficult death. Called the White Plague, the highly contagious disease can overcome entire families and in some cases entire towns. Anything needed to be done to contain it, and fast. Fast forward to 1910 when Waverly Hills Sanatorium was established on a high hill in Jefferson County, Kentucky, a hospital for the treatment of TB patients. Doctors and nurses did their best to keep it as self-sufficient as possible to limit the risk of infection spreading to the surrounding community. They maintained their own essential services, and the hospital workers weren't allowed to transfer for fear of spreading the disease. As soon as the Waverly Hills opened, it was overrun with sick patients. The hospital was rebuilt and expanded to meet demand, including the addition of a children's pavilion. This ward was designed to house children with TB, as well as the children of sick patients who had no one else to care for them. Diagnosis of TB often meant death. This was long before the days of antibiotics. Doctors were at a loss on how to treat the disease. Fresh air, rest, and proper nutrition was thought to be the best treatments, especially fresh air. It was so important that patients were often placed on open patios or in front of open windows, regardless of the weather. Fresh air was more important than staying out of the snow. As the illness progressed, more desperate measures were required. Exposing a patient's lungs to ultraviolet light in a so-called sunroom was one common treatment. An alternative method involving placing balloons into a patient's lungs and inflating them to encourage the lungs to breathe. That is crazy! Then there was the last resort, as the doctors called it, surgically removing some ribs and the surrounding muscle tissue to ease the pressure of the lungs. Patients rarely survived it. For cases such as these, nurses had the death tunnel, a 500-foot chute used to lower dead bodies out of the hospital to the bottom of the hill. It wasn't just used for convenience. It helped protect the other patients' mental health. The sight of so many bodies leaving through the front door would have been devastating for patient morale. It was business as usual at Waverly Hills until it was closed in 1961. New antibiotic treatments managed to do what UV exposure and removing body parts could not, and TB was almost completely eradicated. Unfortunately for the patients of Waverly Hills, many of them entered the hospital by the front door and left via the death tunnel. Keeping up with the disease left most records in disorder. No one knows exactly how many people died within Waverly Hills' walls. Speculators say 63,000, though historians opt for a more modest 8,212 deaths. After the TB hospital was closed, Waverly Hills was reopened as Woodhaven Geriatric Center? I don't really know how to say that. Geriatric Center. No one paid much attention to what went on at the facility after that, but they should have. In 1982, Woodhaven was closed by the state because of patient neglect. For 20 years, Waverly Hills laid vacant. Well, almost. Despite its disuse, crumbling walls, and increasingly decrepit state, the homeless flocked to Waverly Hills for a dry place to sleep. It also became a favorite haunt of vandals and partiers looking for a thrill. That's when the stories started. The paranormal sightings at Waverly Hills began as whispers in the Jefferson County community. Mysterious doors slamming, lights on when there was no power to the building, the sound of footsteps in empty rooms, disembodied voices. No one paid the rambling of hoodlums and the homeless much mind, but the stories became so frequent they could no longer be ignored. They even piqued the interest of the Louisville Ghost Hunter Society, who came to investigate the hospital and bring its secrets into the light. Since then, the sanatorium has been dubbed one of the most haunted places in the world. Maybe that's because you don't even have to venture inside the building to spot something eerie. Countless people have seen the same desperate spectral woman running out the front entrance of Waverly Hills. Witnesses saw her hand and legs bound in chains, blood dripping from her wrists and ankles. She screams desperately for someone to help her, then disappears into thin air. Could she have been one of the many victims of TB who died at the hospital, or one of the tortured residents of the prison-like elderly home that followed? No one can say. One thing's for sure, the willing woman isn't alone. The spectral appearances of countless children, likely young victims of TB, still roam the hospital. Many visitors have heard the sound of children laughing and playing on the building's roof, even singing nursery rhymes like Ring Around the Rosie. When visitors investigated the strange sounds, no one was to be found. It makes sense that the spirits of children might linger on the roof. They were taken up there for heliotherapy, where doctors exposed them to the sun and fresh air in hopes of alleviating TB symptoms. More sinister children can be found deeper in the building. On the third floor, a ghost of a little girl has been seen so many times that visitors have given her a name, Mary. Mary appears in different ways to different people, maybe depending on her mood. Sometimes visitors find her harmlessly, though eerily, playing in the hall with a ball. Sometimes she's just lurking and watching. The account of one terrified visitor shows a different side of Mary. The person found a more disturbing Mary in one of the rooms on the third floor and claimed after that Mary was not normal. The little girl appeared to have no eyes, just black gaping sockets where they once were. Witnesses report that visitors ran screaming from the building and refused to return. Many believe her story, since other witnesses have also reported seeing the same girl peering down at them from windows on the third floor. Mary's not the only little one roaming Waverly Hills' upper levels. Just one floor up lurks the ghost of Timmy. He's been seen and discussed so much over the years that it's hard to parcel out fact from fiction, but legend has it he was 7 years old when he died at Waverly from TB. He's been there ever since. Like Mary, Timmy has also been seen playing with a ball in the hallways, but has become more famous for it, since it's the only thing he ever seems to want to do. Visitors often bring balls with them to the fourth floor in an attempt to communicate with him. Sometimes the ball seems to move on their own accord. Other times you can hear a ball bouncing and the sound of a boy's laughter. Several photos taken on the fourth floor have appeared on the internet showing the eerie face of a young boy peering around the corner. Dying at such a young age, Timmy will forever be a child, one who wants to play, even if he can't manage to depart the hospital where he languished and passed away. A few ghostly children might seem harmless enough, but the fifth floor never fails to horrify. The floor looks normal enough, with a couple of nurses' stations and patient rooms. Legend has it, the fifth floor is where the doctors house the TB patients who had gone mad from their suffering, though no one can say for sure. Reports of strange shapes, disembodied voices, and unexplained sounds are more common on this floor than any other. Hands down, the most mysterious and ghostly part of the floor, possibly even the building, is room 502. Even just approaching it, visitors often feel incredibly uncomfortable, overwhelmed with a sense of despair. That would make sense considering the sad history the room holds. Legend has it that in 1928, a nurse was found in the room hung by the neck from a light fixture. Suicide. The woman had become pregnant out of wedlock by one of the doctors or superintendents of the hospital. No one knows which. Depression overtook her, and rather than admit the shame of being pregnant and not married, she took her own life, and that of her unborn child. But that wasn't the end of the despair for room 502. In 1932, another nurse jumped out of the window, plunging to her death. Unlike the previous woman, no one knows why this nurse would have taken her own life. People at the time speculated she may have been pushed out. No one was ever able to solve the mystery. It would seem that one or both of the nurses who lost their lives in room 502 still linger today. Some have witnessed the complete apparition of a woman in white lingering in the doorway of room 502. Others have seen strange shadows and heard whispers. One thing is for sure, room 502 is not a welcoming place. Often the door closes on its own accord. Many have heard a clear and firm voice saying, "Get out." Visitors can't help but wonder if that's what the nurse heard before she was pushed out the window. Nowadays, it's not possible to wander through Waverly Hills on your own. You have to go on a guided tour. With Waverly's long history of disease, suffering, patient neglect, and untimely deaths, the residents never stop trying to make their story heard by those who listen closely enough. Recently, the hospital was purchased by a private couple who plan to convert it into a 4-star hotel for ghost lovers and thrill seekers. Now the big question is, will the nurses allow anyone staying in room 502 to last the night? I knew these stories were going to be crazy, and I've never learned about these places. Surprising enough, I've never learned about these places before. And so this is really interesting to me. I hope you guys like this. I hope you find this interesting. And this next place we're going to learn about is Taunton State Hospital. In 1854, Massachusetts Taunton State Hospital opened. Commissioned by the government because of overcrowding in the state's existing mental hospitals, the new building was coined the State Lunatic Hospital at Taunton. The hospital was impressively massive, designed to separate patients based on sex and severity of illness. It was built on a hilltop to give patients access to the only real treatments for insanity at the time: fresh air and quiet scenery. That's insane to me, and I'm going to cut this off for a second. It's crazy to me that they used to think that mental illness could be solved by something as easy as fresh air. It's so insane how far we have come with mental health and how much more open people are about mental health, because this, I don't know, that alone is so insane to me. Within the first 8 weeks of opening, Taunton received 250 patients. By 1873, more than 500 people lived there. The demand for places to house the insane grew greater, and soon Taunton was expanded to include group homes, crisis centers, sick wards, and juvenile housing. Young delinquents with a history of violent behavior or mental health issues were sent to Taunton by the state. Often patients who were committed and subjected to treatment were not actually mentally ill. Taunton, in particular, became known by historians as a place to lock up troublesome immigrants, especially the Irish. Most who came to Taunton never left. Soon it resembled a self-contained city. As such a large and well-equipped facility, Taunton was home to many high-profile patients. Probably the sickest among them was Jane Toppin, nicknamed Jolly Jane. A former nurse, Jolly Jane was also a confessed serial killer. One of her favorite pastimes was administering lethal doses of drugs to her helpless patients and lying next to them while they slowly drifted into death. 31 people lost their lives at Jolly Jane's hand, at least that she admitted to. When put on trial, she managed to convince the jury that she was insane, sending her to Taunton for the rest of her life. She was once said to have admitted that her life's desire was to kill more people, specifically helpless people, like any man or woman who ever lived. On the surface, the lunatic hospital's deranged patients might seem like the most frightening thing about the place, but the nocturnal activities of the staff are what really gave Taunton its horrific reputation. Standard practice at many mental hospitals of the time was to try experimental treatments, including water and shock therapy. Water therapy involved placing patients in scalding and freezing baths of water to see what effect it had on the body. How this was supposed to improve the sanity of patients, no one really knows. And while you can't blame doctors for using what they thought were best practices of the day, heavy and persistent rumors circulated about the extracurricular activities of workers at Taunton. Some say the hospital workers would take the most incapacitated patients down to the basement to perform cult rituals that involved torture and even sacrifices to Satan. For some doctors, Taunton may have been an opportunity to perform experiments that wouldn't have been possible elsewhere. Rumors fly that patients' limbs were removed and reattached to other patients to see how well the body reacted. Usually these experiments resulted in death. It may all sound a little far-fetched, but the mysterious satanic symbols found throughout the basement of the hospital can't be explained any other way. Even more convincing is the legacy the basement has held ever since those dark days. Many staff without knowledge of the basement's dark past reported feelings of discomfort and despair when they entered it, as well as unexplained cold spots that seemed to follow them throughout the room. Even many hardened criminals, residents at Taunton, who were already accustomed to dank rooms and dark smells, refused to enter the basement to do chores, often losing privileges because of it. Whatever punishments they were threatened with were not enough to convince them to spend more than a few minutes in the hellish basement. One staff member couldn't blame them. He only made it to the bottom step of the stairs before he felt forced to stop. He closed his eyes and saw flashes of what he believed were the horrific events that transpired there over the years. He quit his job, left the hospital, and never came back. To this day, he can't bear to explain what he saw. Almost as well known as the infamous basement at Taunton are the surrounding woods. Legend has it that many members of the town, not just the hospital staff, performed bizarre cult rituals there. Back in the day, people reported hearing moaning, screaming, and loud bangs coming from the Taunton woods. The really strange thing is that people today still hear them. Some say the sounds are all that remain of the tortured souls who were brutally sacrificed there. Parts of Taunton were still in use until recent years, and one patient in particular had a very frightening experience in the woods. Hoping for freedom, he escaped the main facility and disappeared into a cemetery located in the woods. Deciding to lay low and hash out a plan to escape the area unseen, the man spent the night in the cemetery. In the dark that night, he felt cold hands touch his shoulder and realized he had been caught. But when he raised his arms and turned around, he saw no captor. Instead, an almost discernible voice whispered in his ear, "Leave." So that's what he did. Breathlessly, he headed back to Taunton Hospital and turned himself in. The basement and woods are the most unsettling parts of Taunton, full of tortured lost souls. It would seem, however, that the lingering spirits haunt beyond those areas. A large number of patients reported seeing the apparition of a man lurking in their rooms in the main building. Sometimes he appears as no more than a shadow, but somehow manages to crawl across the wall. Other times he's nearly solid, but looks freakishly tall, as if stretched out. However, there are a few things about his appearance that are always consistent. He's male, always appears in the corner of the room, and no patient has ever been able to see his face. Other strange occurrences in the hospital are less apparent, though no less unsettling. A large number of staff members working in the Goss building claim to have seen a man wearing white, wandering the halls of the third floor. Others claim that the lights in the room would turn on or off on their own, or complain of strange, unexplainable noises from vacant areas of the hospital. While the main ward of Taunton State Hospital was shut down in 1975, the hospital remained in use in some capacity until an unexplained fire partially burned it down in 2008. Its long-term use made ghostly sightings a regular problem, frightening residents and workers alike. Despite efforts in Massachusetts to repair and restore the building after the fire, it was demolished in 2009. One would hope this was enough to put some of the tortured souls of Taunton to rest. But then again, the stories coming from the woods and cemetery continue. And then if you guys like this, the next one we're going to read about is Old Changi Hospital, as well as the Beechworth Lunatic Asylum. So if you guys are interested in any of this, please let me know. I find these really interesting. I love learning about this kind of stuff. And so if you want me to keep reading from this book, just let me know. Or if you want to read it on your own, you can do that too. If you don't want to hear me read about it and you just want to read about it, then that's fine. Again, I found this book on Amazon. I said the name at the beginning, and I'm too lazy to open my phone and find the name of it again. And I also don't want to lose my place in the book, because I think that I might lose my place in the book if I check. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, if you want me to read more of these, I would love to do that. This is something a little bit different than I've been posting recently. I feel like recently I've been posting a lot of the same content, just like back and forth between Let's Not Meet, Paranormal, and TikTok videos. So I wanted to put something else in here. So if you like these, I would love to keep reading them. I've said that like 75 times at this point, but I really want to keep reading more. So please like this video. But other than that, I am gonna go. I love y'all. I will see you in the next one. Bye. And look what I'm wearing. I'm wearing my own merch. I feel like I never wear my own merch. I wear it all the time off camera. I was about to say off stream. I wear it all the time off camera because I love my merch, and I wear like the hoodies and stuff all the time because it's fucking freezing and my heater's broken. But I feel like I never actually wear it on camera for some reason. Like I never think to wear my merch on camera, so I'm repping my Halloween merch today, even though it's not Halloween anymore. It's not even Christmas. But okay, I'm gonna go. See ya.